Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, author of the Throne series, and I have been binge reading mummy books. All of the Goosebumps mummy books, because the newest Goosebumps House of Shivers book is out, and it's time to go through every mummy book there is. So, I'm excited to talk about this book because the mummy books are very interesting to me. R.L. Stine, on one hand, I think has no idea what to do with mummies. But on the other hand, I think he knows how to set up the atmosphere. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about none other than Goosebumps number 5, The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. I have to go into this review first saying this. I absolutely love Egypt stories, mummy stories, so I feel like my views might be a tiny bit biased because I already really love the subject matter and I love books about Egypt. So I really love these kinds of stories because of the atmosphere, the exploration piece of it, the, dread of like, is there a curse? Is there not a curse? What's going to happen? So I feel like I come to these books with that. However, that said, Goosebumps, I have never read any of the Goosebumps mummy books until now. I have read almost every, as of the recording of this video, I've read almost every single mummy story that R.L. Stine has written for Goosebumps. And it's very interesting because I'm starting to notice some patterns from him about his mummy stories, and we will definitely get into that. So in this first book, this was the first mummy book that R.L. Stine wrote, The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, in the original 62 series, and this book stars a kid named Gabe. And Gabe is going to go spend the summer in Egypt with his parents. He goes with his parents, and while they're there, they're going to probably see his uncle, who is an archaeologist, an Egyptologist, who's been working in the pyramids in Egypt. And Gabe has a cousin named Sari, and Sari and Gabe, they are kind of like frenemy cousins because they like hanging out with each other and they have a good time together, but they always try to one-up each other and outdo each other. And so throughout this book, we're exploring this pyramid because Gabe ends up having to go with his uncle because his parents have to go to a meeting in another city. And so Gabe stays behind and goes with his uncle and Sari to the pyramids, and there may or may not be a mummy inside that pyramid that is coming to life, perhaps. Now, what's very interesting about this book, I'm not going to say anything else about the plot because I feel like this one has to be experienced. So I'm not going to talk any more specifically about the plot. But what I will say, this book is very different from other Goosebumps books. This is an early Goosebumps book, and I think in these earlier books, R.L. Stine knew a little more what to do with character development, and maybe that's because he wasn't having to churn these books out quite so fast. So because R.L. Stine wasn't having to churn these books out, I think he was able to spend more time on the characters, developing them, helping them to be more fleshed out. I will say this book is slower paced, kind of like a mummy. I don't know, just throwing that out there, because some people have complained like, oh, this book is so slow, it moves so slowly, and this is one of those books that is atmosphere building. It is not a off to the races, moment after moment excitement. However, there is a huge sense of dread throughout this book, and some legitimate questions about what's actually going on here. And I will also say the ending of this book is quite intense. I thought, wow, this is kind of going there for a Goosebumps book. This is a little bit intense and a little bit scary what is happening in this book, because the ending has just this almost like horrifying like feel to it. Like I kept thinking if this were a movie, I would hear like the chanting choir with no instrumentation, but it would just be like this ominous chanting choir in the background of this whole scene, and there's like fire and all kinds of stuff happening, and it is so intense. And I thought, wow. And also there is an evil villain in this book, and I'm not going to talk about the villain at all, but there is an evil villain in this book who has very, very evil things that they're doing. And I thought, wow, this is This is so intense for a Goosebumps book out of the ones that I've read so far. There's not really much of R.L. Stine's trademark humor in this book. I feel like it kind of doesn't do much with humor. This one's a little more serious in my opinion. Like there are some like practical jokes that are pretty typical of a Goosebumps story, but none of them come off in the, oh, that's really like kind of trying to be funny or really funny way. They're all a little bit like, oh, you shouldn't be messing around like that. That's bad news. And I will also say there is one scene near the end that was so claustrophobic. And I kept thinking like, oh, I don't like this. This is really claustrophobic. I am not sure how this is going to end. And it legitimately had some moments where I thought, I don't know how this is going to end. I don't know what is going to happen to these characters, if they're all going to make it or not, because it was just that intense near the ending of this book. I will say there's a little bit in the middle, some kind of runaround stuff. I've talked about this before, especially Spine Chillers series from the 90s does this quite a bit. And there's been a couple other Goosebumps books that I've read that have done this as well, where it's kind of like what I call runaround scenes, where it's sort of the same scenes happening over and over in the middle of the book to kind of fill it out. And so I thought some of those parts I didn't love quite as much. And I thought, okay, let's get moving here. Let's get going. And I will also say, this is not a spoiler, but I don't think R.L. Stine knows what to do with mummies. I actually think in general in horror, people don't really know what to do with mummies. And if you have a good mummy book suggestion, please put it in the comments down below because I would love to read it. I've watched a lot of the old Universal horror mummy movies, and a lot of times in those, I also felt like they did not really know what to do with the mummy. It kind of always was a little more about the side characters than it was about the mummy itself. Because mummies are typically slow moving, because they are sort of like this ominous, just I'm coming and there's nothing you can do to get away from me, but you can run away from me because I'm kind of slow. So there's a little bit of a question of like, what do you do with mummies and how do you play this up? But I will say, when the mummy shows up in this book, the mummy shows up in this book. And it's pretty intense. I just wanted more. I wanted more out of the mummy action. I wanted more from the mummy scene. And I thought, oh, I wish there was more of this and a little less of that running around in the hotel room, because there's quite a few scenes in the hotel room that just kind of keep going and going a little bit. And I thought, let's get past these and let's get back to the mummy and the pyramids and all the sand and all that good stuff, because that stuff is the interesting thing here. So all that said, I do think this is a great entry. I think it was a good first mummy book. And I think that R.L. Stine did good with what he had. But like I said, I don't know if he quite knew what to do with the mummy just yet, because I have read now, like I said, almost all the mummy stories, and there's some mummy stories I'm going to be reviewing soon that R.L. Stine had some great ideas of what to do with the mummy, and we will talk about that when we get to those reviews. But for now, let's keep talking about The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, because like I said, I think this one ends really well. I think it has a great ending, and there's some creepy things. There's some really interesting side plots going on. But at the end of the day, how many stars do I give this book? That's the real question. So while I really liked this book quite a bit, I do give it 4 out of 5 stars. I don't think that this book landed the mark in every sense, because I think that R.L. Stine kind of ran around a little bit with the characters for a little bit. And also I feel like there was just not quite enough mummy action that I wanted, but the Egypt stuff is here in spades. So if you're looking for good Egypt stories and sand and pyramids and all those sorts of things, there is quite a lot of that. So I really did have a good time with this book. I think it was pretty fun. It's definitely a very solid entry in the OG 62 of Goosebumps, and I definitely would recommend it. I think it's worth reading, especially if you like mummy stories, then you will definitely like this one. If you are not into mummy stories, this might be kind of slow and a little bit boring to you. If you're not, I feel like every kid went through that Egypt phase, and if you are out of your Egypt phase, even as an adult, you might not like it. But if you still have fond memories of your Egypt phase as a kid, then you might like this book quite a bit. So that's my review of The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Have you read this one? What do you think? I'd love to know in the comments. So until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.